there's a special kind of mother-in-law who truly believes she deserves an award, or in this case, a salary for the mere act of raising a son. Mine is one of them. From the beginning, she made it very clear that she viewed her son not as an individual, but as a lifetime investment, one that she expected to pay dividends long after he moved out and married. And I don't mean in the emotional sense. I mean actual financial dividends. At first I thought she was just eccentric, harmless, the type to complain that we never visited enough or that store-bought sweets lacked the warmth of tradition. Annoying, yes, but manageable. She dropped little barbs about how modern women were too independent, too assertive, too quick to forget their place. My husband would awkwardly change the subject. I'd bite my tongue, nothing worth setting the house on fire for. But then she said something that made me pause. It was a regular Sunday dinner. I'd cooked, and she was 3 bites in when she looked straight at me and said, not jokingly, not sarcastically, but with absolute sincerity, "You know, back in our family, it was tradition for the daughter-in-law to give the mother-in-law a little monthly gift, like a token, a thank you for raising the man she gets to marry." She smiled sweetly. My husband froze mid-sip. I blinked. She clarified. She wasn't talking about gifts like flowers or chocolates. No. She meant a direct cash payout. A set amount. Something modest like a couple of $100 per month. She even said it like that. Modest. I laughed at first because surely that was a joke. But she didn't laugh. My husband forced a chuckle and mumbled something about it being a sweet tradition. She nodded, satisfied, and said it was just an idea. But you could tell she expected me to take it seriously. Now, I've worked hard for everything I have. I wasn't born into money. I climbed my way up. Paid for my own college, started my own business, took no handouts. So when someone casually suggests I owe them a portion of my income every month simply because I married their son, I do not take that lightly. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I figured it was just a random comment, something she said to fish for attention. I didn't want to overreact and cause a scene. I mean, surely no one would ever actually expect that, right? Wrong. Over the next few months, she kept bringing it up in increasingly casual ways. At a family lunch, she'd sigh and say things like, "Imagine how nice it would be if this tradition still existed." Or, during dinner at her place, she'd remark, "My friend's daughter-in-law gives her a little monthly gift, so respectful, such a good girl." The kicker? She started hinting that I had agreed to it. She told my husband's aunt that she was so touched that I wanted to honor her this way. She even told her neighbor that our family was finally going back to its roots. I only found out when that aunt brought it up at a baby shower and clapped me on the back like I was Mother Teresa. She said it was so rare to find daughter-in-laws who actually respected their elders. She even asked me if I'd be willing to talk to her own son's wife to help inspire her. I was stunned. I asked my husband and he sheepishly admitted that his mother had been pressuring him to formally ask me. She told him that I'd take it better if it came from him and that it would show that he stood with his family traditions. I asked him if he actually wanted me to do this. He said no, of course not. But he also didn't want to start anything. And that's the thing with my husband. He's a good man. But when it comes to his mother, he's been conditioned to keep the peace at all costs. She knows how to guilt him like it's an Olympic sport. I realized right then that if I didn't handle this myself, this absurd idea would become gospel. The way she kept repeating it, sewing it into conversations, planting it with extended family. It wasn't a request, it was a campaign. So I smiled, I nodded, I pretended to be moved by her beautiful family tradition. I told her what a brilliant idea it was. I said she was right and this was something worth preserving. She lit up and told me how proud she was. Then I told her I was going to help her spread this tradition. I said we should tell everyone, her sisters in law, her brother's kids, her cousin's kids, her daughter in law, everyone. After all, it's such a beautiful custom. Why shouldn't the whole family benefit from her wisdom? She looked a little thrown, but she smiled and said, "Yes, yes, let's make it a thing." And oh, I did. At the next family gathering, I stood up in front of everyone and gushed about how my mother in law had reintroduced a lovely tradition. I told them how it was meant to honor mothers in law for raising fine sons, and how each daughter in law could now show appreciation with a small monthly allowance. People clapped sarcastically. Her sister in law, the wife of her older brother, laughed and said, "Oh, I love that. I'm telling my son's wife tonight." Mother in law's eyes went wide. And just like that, her modest couple of $100 turned into a Frankenstein's monster. Everyone wanted in. Her cousin's daughter in law texted her that same night asking how much she should start with. Her own daughter asked her if this was now mandatory since mother in law had clearly led the charge. Of course, all of them were taunting her. And now my phone hasn't stopped buzzing. People keep thanking us for bringing this up. And mother in law, she started texting me saying I misunderstood her, that it was just a joke and that I didn't need to take it literally. But I did. Oh, I very much did. Because sometimes the best revenge is letting someone's words bite them back with full public support. Update 1. For people saying I was being excessive, let me rewind a couple of weeks before this. There was this one weird dinner that was heavy on my chest. My husband and I didn't talk about it much, not because we agreed with her nonsense, but more because neither of us knew how to begin. He just kept mumbling that his mother had a strange way of showing love, and that she probably didn't mean it literally. I didn't push him. I knew he wasn't buying it either. He just didn't want to start a family war over what he hoped was just another one of her tone-deaf remarks. That hope didn't last long. A few days later, my husband forwarded me a message from his mom. It was a list of monthly expenses she had typed out on her phone. Food, utility bills, outings with friends, salon visits, and a casual note underneath that said I could start with $500 per month as a token of gratitude for raising such a fine man. She added that it wasn't about the money, but about tradition and respect. I stared at the message for a long time, waiting to feel something other than disbelief. When that didn't happen, I just laughed. I asked my husband what he thought. He just looked exhausted. He said that he loved his mom, but this was getting out of hand. He didn't remember any such tradition and had no idea what she was even talking about. But he also wasn't the type to directly confront her, which is probably why she thought she could get away with this in the first place. I told him that if he didn't say anything soon, I would. He tried calling her to clarify things, just to gently explain that what she was asking was inappropriate and out of line. But she immediately burst into tears. She wailed that she was being disrespected, that after all her sacrifices, this is the thanks she got. I could hear her on the phone speaker, screeching about how today's girls were just selfish and money-minded, that she should have just arranged his marriage the traditional way so she wouldn't have to deal with this embarrassment. When she hung up on him, I knew that was the beginning of the end. We tried ignoring it for a while, but she kept at it, dropping passive-aggressive messages in the family group chat about some daughters-in-law who don't believe in culture, or suddenly posting old photos of my husband as a baby with captions like, "The reward of motherhood deserves more than just words." Honestly, it was all becoming so unhinged that even her own cousins began to text us privately, asking if she was okay. And that's when I had an idea. See, if this was about tradition and family values, maybe we could test just how deep that went. I asked my husband to do one simple thing: take her idea and pitch it to her brother's family, specifically her sister-in-law, just to see what she'd say if she had to start handing over cash to her mother-in-law each month for raising the man she married. So I think I forgot to mention this part before. It happened right before the baby shower, maybe a week or so. At first, my husband looked nervous, like he wasn't sure this was the route we wanted to go down. But he went with it anyway, so everybody knew what was going to happen at the baby shower. Don't worry, our relatives hosting it were in on it too. You already know what happened there. And yes, my husband had a private conversation with his mother before the list was sent. He hadn't taken it seriously. Now it was time to escalate things. Let's fast forward to 1 week after the baby shower. Mother-in-law had invited all of us to her place. Recently, the meetups have been way too much, mostly because of different events. This time, my husband took charge and brought it up. He said something like, "Mom had this really interesting idea the other day about how it's only fair for daughters-in-law to contribute to their mother-in-laws monthly since they raised the sons. Said it's a kind of modern tradition now. Remember, we were talking about it during the baby shower last week. What do you guys think?" The table went dead silent. His aunt, his mother's own sister-in-law, was the first to laugh. She asked mother-in-law if she was actually being serious, that she thought it was a joke the last time. She said that if her mother-in-law ever brought that up, she'd politely ask if she wanted a handwritten thank you note instead. Then his uncle chimed in, asking if that meant his wife would also be entitled to a cut of their future daughter-in-law's salary. Everyone laughed, thinking it was just a joke, until my mother-in-law's face went pale, and she said it was just a joke too. That's when my husband knew she was backtracking hard. She tried to laugh it off, claiming it was just sarcasm taken out of context, that she never expected any money from us, and that she was just teasing us because she knew I was smart enough to handle a little banter. She even made some weird comment about how it was reverse dowry, like she was trying to spin it into some modern feminist thing. Too bad it was too late. Word spread in the family fast, and my husband told me that her own sister, who'd always kept a polite distance, began sending her sarcastic messages about whether she'd also get an invoice every time her son mowed the lawn. It was actually kind of funny watching her squirm under the very logic she'd been pushing onto me. Now she's been calling us constantly, asking why we twisted her words and made her look greedy in front of the family. I haven't said much, I don't think I need to, because the truth is, I didn't make her look greedy. She did that, all on her own. Update 2. A few days after the family dinner disaster, my mother-in-law showed up at our place unannounced. She walked in with the kind of sullen face you'd expect from someone grieving a betrayal, and I braced myself. I knew this wasn't going to be a peaceful visit. My husband had just gotten home from work and we had dinner on the stove, but she sat herself down and began sighing like a martyr, awaiting a crowd to notice her wounds. She said she couldn't believe how everyone was treating her now, that ever since I twisted her words and set the family against her, she'd been getting cold shoulders from her own sisters, especially her sister-in-law, the one I joked with at dinner. Apparently, her sister-in-law had gone home to her husband and casually brought up the idea of getting paid for raising him. And surprise, surprise, he hadn't found it cute. He was furious. Now, mother-in-law was apparently being blamed for spreading entitled nonsense and breaking the harmony between families. Her voice trembled when she said she'd never felt so disrespected and ostracized in her life. That she was hurt. I couldn't even take a joke. That she raised a good man, my husband, and instead of being appreciated for it, she was now being punished. I let her finish and then I calmly sat across from her and said she was only feeling isolated now because she had tried to manipulate others into paying her for a role she chose. No one forced her to raise her son. That was her job as a parent. And trying to convert it into some sort of reoccurring reward system, like a monthly direct deposit from her daughter-in-law, wasn't just offensive, it was greedy. I reminded her of the way she had cornered my husband behind my back, tried to make him feel guilty for not defending her, and pushed this as some kind of sweet tradition instead of owning up to the fact that it was just about money. That's not how you treat your son or his wife. I told her point blank that I was done being the only one expected to sacrifice in the name of family. Whether it was time, energy, peace, or actual money. She always found a way to imply that I owed her, but I didn't. I never did. And I wasn't going to keep bending just to play along with her illusions of respect. My husband, to his credit, sat beside me and told her the same thing, that he loved her, but he was ashamed of how she tried to manipulate the situation. That she should have known better than to start something like this in a room full of people who could see through her intentions. He told her that from now on, we'd have clear boundaries and financial requests would no longer be tolerated. If she ever had a real emergency, we'd talk. But there would be no more nonsense about payments for raising him or helping her feel appreciated. She cried and she told him he was choosing me over his own mother. But he held his ground. He said this wasn't about choosing sides. It was about growing up. And the fact that she still expected to be treated like royalty because she did what every parent is supposed to do was the real problem. Later that week, the fallout spread faster than I expected. Apparently, mother-in-law's sister-in-law shared everything with the larger family group chat, complete with jokes and summaries of what my mother-in-law had tried to pitch to me, which was brought up at the baby shower and the dinner. And as expected, most of the family wasn't amused. Her own cousins started calling her out for sounding like she was treating motherhood like a subscription service. My sister-in-law, who had always been a little wary of mother-in-law's antics, but usually stayed silent, finally spoke up too, and she told her that trying to guilt-trip people into paying her was just wrong, and the fact that she hadn't apologized for the whole mess said everything about where her priorities really were. My mother-in-law tried to do damage control. She called it all a joke taken too far. said it was just an icebreaker conversation, that we had twisted everything and turned it into something ugly. But by now, no one was buying it. Her backtracking was so obvious that it made her look worse. The more she tried to clean up, the more her colors showed. She eventually stopped coming over unannounced for a while. I think she was embarrassed more than anything else. Not just because of how we handled it, but because for once she didn't get her way. And the thing is, I didn't enjoy seeing her like that. But I wasn't going to apologize either. Not for protecting my peace. Not for standing up for myself. Not for saying what should have been obvious to begin with. You don't ask people to pay you for being a parent. The dynamic shifted after that. My husband and I got stronger, more aligned. I didn't feel like I had to keep walking on eggshells around her anymore. And even though mother-in-law would always have her dramatic flair, at least now she knew where the line was. We weren't going to play along with her delusions anymore. We weren't going to let family become a weapon used to guilt us. And we definitely weren't going to hand over our hard-earned money just to buy a seat at the table of her approval. She wanted to start a tradition? Fine, she started one. A tradition of learning the hard way that actions have consequences. Update 3. By the time I walked into the house that day, I was already on the verge of snapping. It had been a long day filled with back-to-back meetings, passive-aggressive emails, and a splitting headache that had been building behind my eyes since lunch. I had barely kicked off my heels when I heard the knock. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't polite. It was that entitled, rhythmic banging that made my stomach churn before I even opened the door. It was her. Again. She was standing there like she owned the sidewalk, arms crossed, lips pursed, and a pitiful expression slapped across her face, as if that would be enough to make me forget everything. She said she wanted to talk, and that she hoped I was finally ready to listen like a proper daughter-in-law should. She didn't even flinch while saying it. I genuinely think she believed she was owed this conversation. I told her straight up that I wasn't in the mood for theatrics. I had just worked a 10-hour shift, and if she was here to revisit the whole pay me for raising my son nonsense, she could kindly take her nonsense elsewhere. She had the audacity to act shocked, as if I were the one out of line. She started off with her usual self-pity act, how she felt so disrespected and how, ever since our misunderstanding, she had felt completely outcast from our family. She said it was humiliating to know her own daughter-in-law and son were gossiping about her behind her back. I told her point blank that the only reason she was embarrassed was because her plan backfired. I told her that no one put words in her mouth, no one twisted anything. She was the one who came up with that gold-digging tradition and tried to market it like it was some sweet cultural inheritance. I asked her how many other women she had convinced to follow that tradition, because from what I remembered, her own mother-in-law hated her guts. She went silent for once, so I pressed. I asked her, did you pay your husband's mother every month? Out of your pocket? Did you ever write her a check for raising the man you married? Or was that an honor only the younger generation deserved? Her mouth twitched like she wanted to argue, but she had no answer because she knew exactly what she had done. I told her that I was done. I was done letting people, especially ones who didn't contribute a single ounce to our marriage or finances, try to rewrite the rules of how things should be done just because they were older. I told her that being older didn't automatically mean being right. It meant you had more years to learn better. She clearly hadn't. She tried to say that she was just joking and that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, that she never expected me to actually pay her. She just thought it would be nice if I offered. She claimed she only said it that way to motivate me to appreciate her more. I asked her how guilt-tripping someone into financially compensating you was motivational. I asked her what kind of family member uses emotional manipulation as a bonding tool. And then, with my voice calm but firm, I told her this. She needed to hear loud and clear that this behavior, the games, the backtracking, the guilt trips, wasn't going to work here anymore. That door had been permanently shut. She sniffled and then asked how I could be so heartless. She wanted to know how I could forget all the help she had offered during our first year of marriage. I reminded her that her idea of help involved criticizing the way I folded laundry and suggesting I wear more makeup to keep her son interested. I wasn't going to pretend that any of it had been nurturing. And frankly, I told her I was tired of being the one expected to bend over backwards in her name. I had seen her twist and turn every single thing to work in her favor and play victim when people finally got tired of her antics, but now the consequences were hers to carry. She asked if I was seriously going to let something so small destroy our bond. I told her the only small thing here was her respect for my boundaries and our non-existent bond. My husband stood behind me through all of it. He didn't say much, but he didn't stop me either. He didn't need to. We had already talked through everything, and he had finally seen her pattern for what it was. When I turned to him and asked if he had anything to say, he simply said that we weren't doing this anymore, that from now on, all financial requests, no matter how sweetly disguised, were a hard no, like we had previously told her, period. She left after that, not gracefully, of course. There was muttering, there was hand-wringing, but she left. And you know what? The silence that followed was bliss. What I didn't expect was how quickly word spread. In fact, her mother-in-law found it hilarious and decided to bring it back in her own household as a joke. Now she was suddenly getting calls from her in-laws asking for her dues. After all, if it's tradition, why not honor it? She hated that. So now she was calling everyone, insisting it was all a joke, begging them not to take it seriously. She even messaged me asking if we could talk again, woman, to clear the air. But no, I was done. I didn't need to clear the air with someone who had polluted it to begin with. Update 4. It had been a couple of months since that night mother-in-law came over trying to stage another emotional ambush. Ever since I told her off, asked her if she paid her mother-in-law monthly when she got married and whether she thought I was born to serve her, things had been quiet. Tense, yes, but quiet. Until recently. I didn't hear about it directly at first. It started with murmurs. Sister-in-law messaged me out of nowhere asking if we'd heard what happened between mother-in-law and mother-in-law's mother. Basically my husband's grandma. I hadn't. We hadn't spoken to mother-in-law since that whole show she put on. But what I found out next was pure chaos. Apparently, after being humiliated in front of our side of the family for her so-called family tradition, mother-in-law thought it would be a brilliant idea to try spinning the narrative in her favor by going over to her mother's house, my husband's grandma, and telling her that she deserved to be paid too, that her mother had apparently missed out on an opportunity, and that it was only fair she demanded her share from her daughters-in-law too, especially her brother's wife. She went over there with full confidence, smug even, thinking she could pitch this like it was some family legacy that never got a chance to bloom. Unfortunately for her, Grandma didn't take it lightly. From what sister-in-law told me, Grandma practically exploded. She asked mother-in-law whether she had ever handed her a single dollar when she got married. Asked her if she was really that delusional to think that being a mom entitled her to a lifelong allowance from someone else's wife. She apparently even asked mother-in-law whether she was secretly broke and looking for a financial outlet. It spiraled into a massive fight, one that ended with Grandma calling up her son's wife, who is mother-in-law's sister-in-law, and warning her not to give mother-in-law a cent if she ever tried the same tactic on her. Apparently, Grandma didn't stop there. She called up all her children and told them what their sister had tried to do in her name. Now, mother-in-law had nowhere to run. Her own family saw through her scheme. Sister-in-law's in-laws wanted nothing to do with her, and the very idea she tried to pitch as a family tradition, it turned into a family joke. People started mocking it at gatherings, sarcastically asking their spouses where their monthly appreciation fee was. It killed whatever fake prestige she had built for herself. Of course, mother-in-law tried doing damage control. She started reaching out to sister-in-law from her side of the family and even tried calling my husband once, saying it was all a big misunderstanding, that she was just joking when she brought it up to us, that her words had been twisted and she only meant it as a symbolic gesture. We didn't buy it, and neither did anyone else. You don't call something a sweet tradition and compare it to dowry practices if it's a joke. You don't push it with a straight face, guilt trip people for not playing along, and then turn around months later and say it was all in good humor. My husband didn't even entertain her apology. He told her clearly that if she ever needed support in her old age, she could rely on the actual system designed for that, like savings and pension, not manipulating her way through marriages. He was very angry. And as for me, I stayed out of it. I had said my piece. I had drawn my boundary. But what shocked me the most wasn't just mother-in-law's delusion. It was how quickly she folded when the pressure came from someone she respected, her mother. All that fake superiority, all that entitlement, it deflated the second she realized she wasn't on the top of the food chain. I guess it was easy for her to bully the daughter-in-law who never raised her voice. Harder to face the woman who had the guts to raise hers and shut her down without blinking. What I found strangely satisfying in all this was the silence that followed. No more calls, no more texts, no more passive-aggressive comments from mother-in-law. She'd finally retreated, likely embarrassed and licking her wounds, having realized she'd set her own trap and walked right into it. Our household has never been more peaceful. No lingering tension, no awkward family dinners with someone expecting to be served first. No guilt trips about how I should be grateful that she birthed the man I married. Just two people living their lives, my husband and I, unbothered, united and firm about the boundaries that should have been respected from the beginning of our marriage. The thing is, I didn't mind appreciation. I never did. I send gifts. I remember birthdays. I include people. But appreciation is not a transaction. It's not a salary. And it definitely isn't some made-up family tradition you expect other people to fund for you. I think mother-in-law finally learned that the hard way. And I don't feel the least bit bad about it. Because sometimes the only way to teach someone who's been coddled all their life is to let them face a storm they created. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.